Hey, good morning. I'm down here in the nannies and the kids and just checking things out, looking at everything, making sure everything's doing okay. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about Doelings in our nanny herd. And remember, this is about us. It's not about anybody else who handles their goats. I just wanted to visit a little bit about what my philosophy is on the Doelings and why it's like that. There's a point in life where the Doelings are just worried about surviving. We've talked about that before. They want milk from their mama. They want forbs from the ground. They just want to survive and play. That's all they're interested in. Then there's a point where their clock starts ticking. I don't know how else to say that other than they start realizing and wanting to reproduce. And so when that occurs is when we want to try to take advantage of that. And so we go ahead and expose them to the billies then. It just so happens that coincides a lot with the breeding season of their mothers. A lot of things have to go right for them to kind of be successful in that endeavor. And so there's some things that are kind of going against them. Some of the different reasons that it may not be a good idea to go ahead and expose them to the billies are kidding problems. They may have an issue having the kids. Size problems. They may not be large enough body frame wise to support the kid. And just in general, it's going to force them to really have good nutrition. So what happens if they can't fulfill that? Nothing. Other than you lose 1 year potentially of production. At least that's what we think. That's all that happens. I think that if you don't give them the opportunity to fulfill why they were created, and on nature's timeline, then what happens is over the years of continuously doing that, guess what? Those Doelings will stop feeling the need. They will stop coming in when nature or when they were originally created to start sexual maturity. We will slowly move them out of that if we stop exposing them to the billy at that age. That's how nature works. And how do I know that? Because that's what they've done with the cattle. People stop putting the heifers on, bulls with the heifers, because they don't want to have to pull any heifers, or they don't want to have to they want the heifers in excellent shape all the time, or everybody has different reasons. And I'm not saying that's wrong at all. It kind of goes back to what I was saying in the last video where we had the negative comment. It's not wrong. It's wrong for me. I don't want to do that, because our goal is to manage all of our livestock as in sync with nature and how they were created to function in our environment, and we've got to try to figure that out. It's not something that there's a written sentence anywhere that says, okay, goats were created for this function. You need to utilize them this way. They need to be bred here, and you just kind of have to observe. And we do observe deer and things like that, which are very similar to the goats. And they have a lot in common. So we learn a lot from the cattle industry and what they've done to the cattle industry to create a less efficient animal. And they've done really well at that. For the cow-calf guy, they've created a very inefficient animal. But for the packers, it's perfect. That's exactly what they want. Exactly what most of us are producing. So on the goats, we haven't got into that yet, but I'm just, as an observer, I don't want my flock to get to that point. I don't want to do them like that. So I want them to function well for my operation so they can be profitable and the most profitable in my operation. And so for that, I feel like I need to expose my Doelings. If you do go on ahead and expose your Doelings like we do, like I said, they may have trouble having them. They may have them and run off and leave them. Of course, they could do that at a later age also. But you could lose some Doelings. So if we're talking strictly about profitability and you lose several Doelings, they're not going to make up for the amount of kids you may have from the Doelings that got bred and raised them. So there's a little bit at stake both ways. Now, the way we can help them where that doesn't occur, those things, is with time. By exposing our Doelings and giving them the opportunity to fail or succeed, and then select billies out of those Doelings that succeeded, we should slowly start creating a flock that functions well the way we want them to, which in turn will make it more profitable. So that's our long-term goal, and that's why we expose our Doelings. I know that there's probably some people that have a question as to why we do that. No other reason than just from observing nature and trying to do things in sync with nature. I feel like that's how it needs to be done for us, the way we do things out here. We're the only weird ones around, probably. So it has 100% to do with just us and how we want to do it. It doesn't mean anybody else should be doing it that way. That's strictly us. So, the question is, and one of the things that you want to know is, did it work? Is it more profitable to do it like that? And I can say, yes, it is. And it should improve as the years go on. Here comes one of the Doelings right here. Hey, lady. Will they all get bred? No. She's got a baby. Be fair warned, if you try to do that, not only will there be the trials and tribulations of actually having the kids, but then you got to keep them alive, which means you got to keep the Doelings, you know, with their babies, or you have to keep the babies close enough to the dogs where they can protect them. And that was one of the issues that we've observed here. Because we're moving our animals and we're moving them when they're kidding, specifically the Doelings. Typically the Doelings are getting bred in the second cycle, not the first cycle where the main herd does, the second one. And it just so happens that's kind of how the deer are also. It's also how the cattle are, and we've been managing our cattle this way for years. So it's I'm going to say that's how nature works. So that brings up an issue that by the time we kind of hit what I call the brush pastures, the Doelings have started kidding. That means they're having new kids. And so when they have a kid, their job is to stay with the kid. And they do. The problem is, in a brush pasture that is a little bit bigger than some of these other ones, so like this brush pasture we're in right now is 50 acres. That doesn't seem like a huge size, but if the whole flock moves down into this bottom in the brush pasture and is all down here, and you had 4 or 5 Doelings that had new babies and they're still in that, that's a potential problem, because the dogs are all here pretty close. And I'm not saying that some dogs wouldn't stay up there. Sometimes they will, but there's going to be a lot of them where they don't. So that does bring up an issue for things like that you've got to kind of work through. I think what we're potentially going to do next year, because we had a significant amount of Doelings that got bred on that first cycle, I think we're going to pull our billies after the first cycle, before the second cycle, just so our Doelings that got bred will kid with the rest of the group. So by the time we hit this brush pasture, there's not going to be as great a risk as them getting ambushed by some predator. So is that exactly in sync with nature? No, you just let them go. Well, it's just like putting your billies in and pulling them out. You'd never pull your billies out. You just let them stay in there, and that would be in sync with nature. So I'm not saying that you want to do that 100% of the time. At least we don't. We want to try to utilize it as often as possible because we're convinced that that's the best way to manage efficiently and be profitable. But this is one area where I've taken the profitability and, okay, how many Doelings have we potentially lost because of that? And I've decided, is there a way that we can maybe manage that a little bit better? Now, what'll happen from that is we'll get, let's say that 100% of the Doelings breed, typically. I'm just using that number just to use it. Let's say 100% of them breed typically if you leave the billies in for 60 days. And only 50% of them breed if you leave them in for the first cycle. Well, what does that do? The 50% that got bred on the first cycle are going to be the ones that are going to create the babies for next year. They're going to create the nannies for the year after that. And so that genetic tap is slowly going to keep cranking and is slowly going to make it where your percentage as far as nannies that got bred that first cycle is going to be greater every year. It should be greater every year until eventually you just pretty much expect they're almost all going to get bred unless they have something wrong with them health-wise, because they're all going to be coming out of the same genetics that have been doing it. So that's what I anticipate will happen. And am I right? You got me. I'll let you know when I figure it out if it was right. But it does make sense to me, and it's something to try. So what we're seeing now, and the reason I wanted to talk about this is because we're in the second cycle and we're starting to see more and more Doelings drop babies. And it just so happens we're headed into the brush. And so it does make me a little nervous. The other answer to that would be to split your pastures smaller, have a smaller area to cover where you can literally walk it and find everything. That's not feasible for us, but it might be if they wanted to do it for somebody else. So the bottom line is there's a bunch of different ways you can do your Doelings. Do them the way that makes the most sense to you. If you're looking at profitability, you might think about what I said and see if it applies to how you're doing it. Maybe it would help. I know it's going to help us, and it is helping us. So thanks for watching. Hopefully somebody got something out of that. We'll see you next time.